But I thought I'd start by telling you about one day in Somalia, just one day that I spent in Somalia. And maybe I should say, actually, it was a day in two Somalias. It was in 2011, and I took a plane from Nairobi to Mogadishu. And Mogadishu at that time was still occupied, apart from the airport and a tiny part of the city, a sort of hill where the government was. It was occupied by Al-Shabaab, and it was a city of front lines. It was a city of warfare so horrible that people were even firing sort of anti-aircraft missiles down streets. It was an unspeakable form of violence that was going on in Mogadishu at that time. And I arrived at the airport, and there was a woman on the plane who was an extremely glamorous woman dressed in white. And she wanted me to go with her right into the heart of the city. And she said, really, it will be fine, because when I go into the heart of the city, even though I'm from there, I put on my black niqab, my black gloves, my black socks, my black everything, so you can come with me and no one will even know that you're a white person. But I wasn't brave or stupid enough to do so. But anyway, I was there for a while, and it's a terrifying place to be. And then I took the plane from Mogadishu airport to another part of Somalia, which declared itself independent in 1991. It's called Somaliland. It hasn't been recognised internationally, but it's a sort of the land that the world forgot. And what was so surreal is that just an hour and a half after being in that city, I landed in a place called Berbera, a port city. And it's by the sea. And we went for a walk by the sea, and there, sort of totally not aware of us at all, were these girls, like, playing in a pool by the sea. They were teenagers. And not only were they sort of frolicking in the water and rolling around, they weren't even wearing headscarves. I could see their bare legs. They were just tumbling around in the water, and I was just like, I've just been in a city where women have to even cover their hands and their feet. In fact, one friend of mine had thick black socks on in Mogadishu, and she was told they're not thick enough. She was told off by her family. And suddenly I'm seeing these girls who are, I mean, not naked, but they were just so free, and it was just such an extraordinary thing. And then I went from there, I drove to the capital, Hargeisa, which I had last visited in 1994. And there was a funny parallel today when I was walking around the cathedral, and I saw a picture on the wall, and it had I don't know whether they were twin cities, but there were lots of cities that had been bombed, and it had Coventry, and then it had Dresden. And I just thought to myself, Hargeisa in Somaliland was known as the Dresden of Africa, because there was not, when I first visited that city in 1994, there was not one roof left. It was a city of rubble that had been destroyed by planes that took off from its own airport. There was a civil war. And they used to take off from the airport on the hill and circle around and just bomb the city. So the city there was nothing there. It was the worst thing. I've been all over Africa to the worst of the worst places. I've never seen anything like Hargeisa. And when I went back there, 17 years later, I stood on the hill near to the airport. We arrived like that. And I looked down, and this city that I had seen only as stones was this huge city that had been built. There were glittering roofs. It was a city, I was told, of 1 million people. I don't know whether that's true. It was chaotic, but it was a city, and it was completely peaceful. And I suppose that was the time when I became sick at myself as a journalist, and sick, as you said, of all the journalists that tell the story of Nigeria as Boko Haram and corruption, that tell the story of Somalia as, well, Somalia had all the ingredients because it had famine, disease, endless conflict, terrorism, and even like the added ingredient of pirates. But Somaliland was a place that none of those things applied. So I thought, I have to tell a different story, but you can't do that in journalism. You have to fight because they only want the other story. So I wrote a book, basically. And that evening when I was in Hargeisa, I went to the hotel, and there were couples, or men and women, and they greet each other there. They're quite conservative, but they greet each other by kissing each other's hands, and there's a sort of air of mild flirtation. And on that day was the day that Al-Shabaab had banned men and women from shaking hands. And I thought, this is completely crazy. Just, in one part of the country, they're not allowed to even shake hands. Here, they're kissing each other's hands. And sort of, there was something romantic about it. And it was just, I started to ask, how? How did this happen? How did Somaliland, the territory that the world forgot, on its own, form some kind of functioning polity? It's not a recognised country. And it did that because Somaliland was sort of left to its own devices, and the Somalis came amongst themselves and they fought for a while, and then they spoke for years, and they had endless conferences, and they sort of developed a hybrid system of Somali clan politics, which they mixed with a more Western-style democracy. And Somaliland now has incredibly competitive elections. I think it's the most sort of free and fair democracy in not only the Horn of Africa, but the East Africa. You look at Kenya, places like that. The opposition can't win because they cheat. In Somaliland, the opposition wins, even if it's by a matter of 20 or 30 votes.